Hi everyone. It happens so very often in the history of the Orthodox Church that when a certain personage comes along that is not only very pious and very humble, but also extraordinarily intelligent and willing to go the extra mile to spread the Orthodox faith in as many ways as possible, that the power of the devil rises up against him. Sometimes the devil even uses personages within the church. And in this case, it was the culmination of a long period of time in the Georgian Orthodox Church when the Catholicos-Patriarch Kirion II ascended the throne. Now, Georgia, of course, is one of the absolute oldest churches in the world, evangelized initially by Saint Nino of Cappadocia, who came and did wondrous works, so much so that we consider her equal to the apostles. And that church also received autocephaly from the Church of Antioch in the 5th century. Although, if you read some history about it, it seems like it was more of an autonomous situation as opposed to genuine autocephaly, because the Georgian church was still very much dependent on Antioch for approval of its bishops and things like this. Well, this went along like this really until around the year 1000, when the Georgian church started functioning in a true autocephalous manner. And they experienced a bit of a golden age from the 11th to the 14th centuries, when a great blossoming took place. But all the times after that have not been the greatest for the Holy Church of Georgia. And our saint today, who reposed on June 27th, Kirion II, was born in the mid-1800s and immediately began to demonstrate an extraordinary ability to work in areas like linguistics, philology. He did much in regards to the saints of Georgia, the history of Georgia, was very much interested in education and reform of the educational system, and doing absolutely all that he could to spread the Orthodox faith, and along with it the concomitant sense of learning and optimism into the people that he was working with. He was tonsured a monk, made a priest finally, assuming the abbacy of a monastery, and continued on with this vigorous sort of work that he had been doing in his early years. However, when the year before he was born, way back in 1811, happened, because Russia really was dominant in Georgia at that time and had taken over a lot of their land in the southern portion of the country. Because of this, the Russian church abolished the Patriarchate in 1811 and submitted the Georgian church to the same uncanonical synodal system that Peter the Great had established hundreds of years before. Things went along like this for quite a while, the Georgian church struggling to regain its own independence and its own say in matters ecclesiastical. And our saint today was someone who was very much involved in that whole effort. He worked very hard. He was someone who was trying to educate the people as to what the genuine history of Georgia was, and the fact that they had their own cultural institutions that were very much a part of the Orthodox Church at the time. When the Russians came in, they changed a lot of this. The Georgian language was not allowed anymore in church. Instead, Church Slavonic was used. And it was really a lot of oppression at that point in time. Now, we can't really judge the motives of those people that were in the Russian church that were trying to do this, but at the same time, the oppression was definitely something that was very, very real. And in fact, our Catholicos-Patriarch-to-be worked very hard in trying to reclaim much of the property that had actually been given to the Armenian Church, which were Monophysite, illegally, and he tried his best to get as much of that property back as he could, thereby demonstrating himself to be as much as someone who protected the church as, say, Holy Queen Dinar, 1,000 years earlier, who is commemorated on June 30th. So we see that Monophysitism in one form or another had lasted that long, and in fact last even until this very day, although the issues surrounding many of the Monophysite churches now are a lot more complex than you might think in terms of what certain Monophysite churches really do believe. But at any rate, our future Catholicos-Patriarchate worked very hard, very tirelessly, and did all that he could until finally, in the year 1917, that terribly, terribly fateful year for Russia, and that had a tsunami of shock waves that affected the rest of the world. At that point, they did declare their own autocephaly again as a restoration of autocephaly, and tried to reach out to other Orthodox churches to support them. Well, he was finally made Catholicos-Patriarch of Georgia during that year, but his reign did not last long. In fact, in 1918, on June 27th, he was found in the patriarchal apartments, murdered. And unfortunately, those responsible for the murder were never found. In fact, agents of repression against Georgia at that time were even suggesting that perhaps he had shot himself, which anyone who ever knew him knew was absolutely ridiculous, because the authorities had tried to keep him out of Georgia for many years, and when he was finally able to return, thousands of people greeted him as he was much, much beloved. Of course, the Georgian Church struggled on in the early 20th century. In 1943, the Russian Church actually recognized, for mainly political reasons, perhaps, the autocephaly of the Georgian Church. And then it was either 1990 or 1991 that the Patriarchate of Constantinople formally recognized them as well. And of course, today they are considered one of the very important parts of the 14 autocephalous churches of the Orthodox Church. Around 95% of the people living in Georgia have a very positive impression of the church there, and that speaks volumes in and of itself, and they have been flourishing greatly since the early 1990s. However, if it was not for the efforts of Catholicos-Patriarch Kirion II, who knows what the Georgian Church would be like today. He laid the groundwork in so many different areas, not only sporting a very lively and intellectual approach to the things of the faith, but also a very pastoral one, in order that he might set the groundwork for the return of so many of the Georgian people and the areas around Georgia to our Holy Orthodox faith. May we always keep the memory of this wonderful, wonderful saint. Bye-bye.